blank. Okay, I guess we're here. Can everybody see the slides or no?
I can.
You
Yep, I can see them.
Okay, good. Well, that's good. Well, welcome everybody. I just wanted to, this is my first one with this system, so bear with me. And it's on a computer I just dug out of a closet because my other computer died this morning. So you won't see my smiling face, but we've got George Lukes here with us. And today's presentation is more of a conversation about the experience in Utah, both from a agency and consultant perspective, about model-based delivery and what the real implications are for return on investment for going to model-based design. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll queue them up and take care of them kind of as we go. So the first thing I want to talk about is that OpenRoads Designer is the new thing, and it's not optional. For all of the states around the country, everyone's grappling with migrating to OpenRoads. OpenRoads replaces no less than 5 other civil vertical products that Bentley has purchased and developed around and supported over the last few decades. And this application is replacing all of those, which is in the long term a good thing if you're a consultant and you're trying to support work and consultant or agencies across the country. It's a powerful product. It's the nice thing about it is that it's dynamic, it's integrated. The downside to it sometimes is that it's dynamic and integrated. Things tend to update automatically, which is quite nice. But it creates a bit of a modeling paradigm shift that we have to keep in mind because of the dynamic nature of the modeling. There's more relationships set up in the design. There's more that you have to do beyond just in-roads modeling that you've done in the past to produce a product, and that takes a little bit of time to get used to. As you know, you guys are, I think November 1st, 2020 is the absolute deadline for all projects being led after that date having to be done with ORD. So it's definitely not an option for you, but it does require a different way of thinking. And we wanted to talk a little bit about how you get the best return on investment on making that change. So when we talk about model-based design or BIM design, there's a lot there. You can Google a million articles and it will tell you the benefits of it. Better collaboration, cost estimating, pre-construction, visualization, clash detection, and risk mitigation. Really, all of those things come down to usability, constructability, and risk or cost implications. And so that's the easy stuff, right? We can all see that. There's always benefits to finding issues early during the design phase, making sure that your systems work for the user, not having late breaking changes where you have to got to design around something because you've got a more complete model, or not having to deal with something that was just you get it done and then you realize, well, that was a terrible idea. All of that is solved with model-based design, but there's more to it than just that. And there's more implications than just that. There's things you need to think about beyond just the design uh, if you really want to see the full benefit of the return on investment on model-based delivery. Um, so it's not really about the software so much. It's really about how you approach your design and how you approach project delivery overall. And so we've done a number of projects in Utah and other places, and we started to notice an interesting trend. So I put together this diagram to sort of communicate the idea of where we're seeing return on investment and how this has been playing out. And George will certainly jump in here and add some to this. So, if you looked at this, and we've got today in this first column, and our baseline return on investment is kind of what we're delivering today. And then you look at effort or efforts towards a project, you can see that we've got a level of modeling detail. This might be what you'd see on a typical En-ROADS project. And we're at baseline here. And then you've got your plans preparation. So you do a little bit of modeling. You have some gaps. To generate the plans, you don't necessarily have to get everything modeled to the nth degree to have a design that can be built and put into plans form. So we spend a lot of effort up here in this plans area, a little bit in the modeling, and this is what we get. And that works. We've been designing roads like this, well, since CAD's been around. And even before then, even on paper, there was no real modeling, but there's a lot of more plans preparation. If you start to implement model-based design, then what happens is in the early phases, what you're going to see is that your level of effort on modeling goes up. People are starting to use the tools. They're starting to do more detailed modeling because it's now possible. And if you do what a lot of states have done, you keep the level of plans delivery the same. So you don't really change your deliverable requirements. You just start to have more modeling going on. And even if you're just making a jump from En-ROADS to OpenRoads here, the level of effort you're going to have in that initial phase is going to increase simply for the fact that it's a new software. It's not as mature as the other 5 civil verticals. So there's still glitches. So there's a lot of things that you have to overcome. So your total effort actually increases, and your return on investment therefore seems to decrease, at least initially, when you're trying to get over those first steps. And then as you start to push the boundaries, you realize, well, we start to get really detailed with our modeling. And this is always a desire because you want to get some of those things I talked about, pre-construction visualization, better clash detection. All of those things that I mentioned really require more detailed modeling. And if you don't do anything here, but you increase this, you're going to see overall a greater number of hours. And so as an agency, if you work for an agency, you're going to hear us whiny consultants complaining, oh, this is taking us more time, and on and on. Because in fact, we are keeping the baseline deliverable up here, it is in fact taking us more time despite our whining. And that has an impact on the return on investment. So how do we fix that? Or is it worth fixing? Or what's the end game? Like, what are people doing to respond to this sort of realization? Well, we've started to realize that as engineers, we produce plans, and contractors use a subset of what's delivered in that plan. The plan set generally serves multiple purposes, right? So it serves as a construction document to communicate what the engineer's design intent is for building purposes. The maintenance office is going to keep that as sort of a final record of what was done, hopefully with the as-built. You've got contractual people that have things that are on cover sheets just for them in certain states. There's all these things that the plan set has served a purpose for. But for the actual construction piece, we find there's a lot of things that we were putting in plan sets that the contractor didn't need, especially in light of the fact that we can give them higher fidelity models that have more data built into them that are much more accurate than they were. So consequently, if the contractor can rely on the plans less, and these other areas that have need to have plan information can capture that in a digital fashion, we can actually reduce the overall amount of plans creation that we need to do. And so Utah is looking at, and I'll let George speak to this, Utah is looking at ways of creating a new plan approach that has less data. And our model-based delivery projects out there have focused on model as the legal document. Florida is releasing their next gen plans series, the 900 series plans that allow for roll plots, much like what we used in the early projects in Utah, and allow for a significant reduction in the overall plans preparation, with the expectation that these models and the amount of effort that goes into that model delivery is much higher. So that's kind of like the first phase. And when you start to reduce the plans preparation and really focus your energy on the model, you start to see an uptick in the return on investment. But that's not the whole story. That's just kind of correcting the ROI curve back in a favorable direction. So then what happens is at some point, once you get a user base that has a level of comfort, they've got a few projects under their belt, and they start to get into the workflows that work best with the software, and you've got standards and training, all those things firing on all cylinders, you'll see that these things will actually switch around so that your model detail will increase significantly and your plans preparation will go down. And incidentally, as we get better with modeling, you're going to see an uptick in return on investment as well. So these are going to switch around. We're going to probably settle into some point in the future where different agencies realize that there's a lot less they need to deliver directly to the contractor in the form of paper or PDF because they can consume that model. And so that's going to, again, change the direction of this curve for return on investment. And I think what you're going to see long term is where we get to this sweet spot where we've got a very high level detail model. We've got the minimum required plans preparation for the stuff the contractors actually use, other information and other use cases for that plan set that get communicated to other parts, estimating, as-builds. All of that stuff will be captured in some other digital format. And you're going to see ultimately an ROI that is better than what we've seen in the past. That's sort of the prediction. That's where people are working towards. And then there's one other thing I want to bring up, and then I want to bring George into the conversation to sort of talk about what we've actually seen and where we think this is going. And that at the end of the day, you're going to have something that lands in here as we get better at this. Over time, we're comparing what we're doing back here at this first column with 20 plus years of experience using inroads, Geopack, and these products with very well-trodden workflows. And as things mature, we're going to see our ROI increase just for the simple fact that the software will get better, our users will get better, and our plans will get even tighter. And then there's another component to this, which is what happens with asset management. One of the biggest impacts to return on investment is going to come by way of being able to take this digital data that represents our design, store it in our asset management systems, use it for visualization and all these other things. There's an enormous amount of cost that's tied up with being able to accurately keep track of, manage road network infrastructure, or even if we're just talking about any sort of civil project, whether it's a building, a road, an airport, asset management becomes an extremely important component. And because we're starting with digital data that can be translated more directly into those other systems, what we're finding, at least in the early phases, is that you're going to see that also have a push on the ROI curve. So George, could you talk to us a little bit about Utah and kind of where we're at in this curve and what we're doing and how you see this playing out? And I'll stop rambling for a minute or two.
Absolutely, Terry. So, the interesting thing is before I get to where we are, when you look at what Terry's laid out on this graph, I know at least in Utah, what would happen in this kind of where we are today spot, that, in our project delivery process, modelers would get to a point where the project schedule called for them to move to planned production. And sometimes the model was not what they wanted it to be, but they knew that they could go and fix that detail on a plan sheet. So they moved to planned production, got the plans out, advertised the project, and that's just the way business was done. And so as you move down this graph on the x-axis, what you find is exactly what Terry's showing, which is now we're saying to the designers, okay, we need more modeling detail. And it's both in sort of refining the model as well as adding attributes to specific elements and things like that. So that is a real ROI loss, meaning you now have more labor you've got to put into this because you're doing both the plan productions you've always done, plus you're adding more attributes and you're refining the model more. And as you run down further, I mean, that's probably where we saw the biggest complaint was we weren't changing our project schedule, yet we were really asking the designers to really fully model everything, add attributes, and do plans. And so all of a sudden, your ROI has gone down. But the way we looked at it is, typically for pre-construction costs, they may be 10% of the total project value. So the more effort we put into the plans, we're expecting to get a better product in the field with fewer change orders. So as you keep moving down here, now you're getting to the point where you're saying, okay, I've got enough information in my model and I've got the ability in the field to use whether it's a mobile device or a rover or both for that matter, and go directly to the field and not have as much emphasis on that plan production. And the plans don't have as much emphasis either. But one of the things that may be missing from this graph is the human component. And that is, you get out in the field and you give a iPad or even a phone to someone and say, hey, here's the model, go crazy. And that's, unless someone really wants to do it, they're going to push back because that's not an easy thing to just grab and start using. And the tools, frankly, have not been user-friendly, so that makes it even more challenging. So to kind of move past this and get to that positive ROI takes a fairly significant effort to collaborate, not just internally, but with consultants, with contractors, with vendors, and try to make sure that when you get to that point where you're really reducing the plan production, that you've got solutions that designers, that people when you're in advertising, contractors, field crews can use. So we've been fortunate enough to get to the point where on this graph now, we're probably not at the asset management stage, but we're in that one step before that. But the unfortunate thing is the ROI may not be real dollars right now, meaning we've kind of substituted that refining the model and adding attributes that are going to show that information on a mobile device in the field. And so the ROI is more an efficiency standpoint right now rather than a real dollar value. And we expect that when we get to that point of that next part on Terry's slide, the asset management part, where when you have the ability to get that information without having to go and find your plan sheets or going and finding someone that was on the project, we expect that to be a real dollar ROI coming at some point in time soon. So this move to open roads is pretty big from the standpoint of the ability to really add the information you need to everything, the ability to really refine your model and push it toward construction.
So thank you, George. I just noticed a question popped up from Paul Looney. He says, is Utah requiring contractors to provide a final as-built model at the end of construction?
Yeah, something, I'm going to say yes, we do. It's in our contract. But I'm going to say we've gone back and forth on a lot of different stuff. And what it says in our spec is that they're supposed to give it to us in Bentley format. But the reality is contractors don't work in Bentley. They just don't. And so getting information in a model format is a struggle. So we've gone through different iterations of what we should do. One was, hey, let's make it so that the engineer of record and the design team is available in construction, have an as-built model, extract that information, and move it to a database or store it in ProjectWise or something like that. But we've more recently thought that a better approach, and we're now using GIS, and that gives us the ability to tie into our systems. And we are using tools in the field. We're using Esri Collector, and that allows our inspectors to essentially, we've set up a bunch of stuff where it's got the model on there. They go out and look at a specific item, and if it's been installed properly, they say installed, and we use the information from the model to populate a temporary database. We haven't landed on what our final solution is, and we do require the contractor to give us as-builts. But the reality is, I don't know we know what we're going to do with those as-builts, and we're not getting them in a Bentley format either. So we're kind of in that that zone of we haven't made a final decision of how we're going to get to kind of that last frame that Terry's showing there of the asset management system.
Yeah, it's sort of like you have a chicken and the egg situation in that you've got file formats that you could request or require or find a way to get, but then you also need to make sure that whatever your asset management system is, that's the format that you really want, that works best for you. So I think we're still in a learning phase as to how that's going to play out. You know, a lot of folks are looking at the GIS angle. A few folks are looking at the iTwin / iModel approach, but that's a very new product. And I know that there's been some heartburn about the project by project cost. I know Bentley's has changed they've shifted on that, realizing that's not working for folks. So they're looking at creating a one cost for all projects sort of deal. So there's possibilities, and there could be a blended system where you have a combination of GIS, because frankly, there's some things, GIS has been around a long time. It does some things extremely well.
And other things not so well.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think over time, you're going to see maybe some hybrid approaches. Agencies that are stronger with GIS may lean more that way. Agencies that are stronger with traditional CAD may lean that direction. We're still in a learning phase with this as-built piece, and that's going to, I think, ultimately dictate what the agencies are going to have to request or require of consultants and contractors. And
yeah, it's a paradigm shift. You know, we're going from a paper world where we say to a contractor, hey, you're required to give us as-builts. And that's usually in conjunction with our resident engineer, to all of a sudden, you know, the resident engineer and his construction crew and team was responsible to get that, you know, digitized and then put into ProjectWise, and hopefully we can put it on a GIS system so people can get to it. But frankly, that hasn't happened very much either. To now we're at this, okay, we can do data, but it's the same thing. We've got to have that repository and the ability for people to get to that data, and we just don't have it right now.
Yeah. George, I just noticed in the chat, not in the QA, there's a Brad Gregory asks a question. In Utah, who paid for that investment? Was the DOT paying more for designs in the beginning, or was that burden pushed out to the consultants?
Yeah, you know, that was one of the things that we looked at early on. And I'm not going to go too much in the weeds on this, but the reality was we have about 80% of our design dollars going to consultants. And that's usually our big projects, our design build, CMGC. And unfortunately, what it left is our internal design with the not very sexy projects. You know, it's the preservation and rehab projects. And so what happened was we made a conscious decision to try and get our internal designers more on the good projects, the fun projects like this. So we made a strategic decision to go in the direction of starting with super small projects. We started with a project that was just a passing lane project. It was a $3 million construction project, but we did it internally. So we were paying for the investment, but you know, that's our programmatic dollars, our salary dollars, and it made more sense to do it that way. And so even though it took longer, it was sort of that investment we wanted to make in our designers to keep them on board in design and get that knowledge. We have expanded it to consultants, and what we've done on those projects is recognized that that pre-construction cost was going to be higher. And now we're at that stage where we're not seeing the cost being higher than it was in the past, but we feel like we're getting a much better product because we're seeing our engineers estimate lower on those projects. And we're seeing that we're getting a better response from our contractors, and we're seeing a better product altogether in construction. So I think altogether, again, I don't know I can put a dollar value on the ROI, but we're seeing the benefits now.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of focus and dollars put into other areas. I want to see if there's any other questions about this chart before I move on. We're going to talk about some of the considerations and challenges, talk about what Utah has done to sort of smooth the way for this process. So if you have any other questions, I'll give you just a second to throw them into the Q&A or chat window, and then we'll move on.
And before we move on, I just wanted to say, and this is Kevin Martin, by the way. I just wanted to say that when I first saw this chart back several weeks ago, this was like an epiphany. We've always thought this, but we really appreciate, Terry, the way that you have captured this in a graph, because engineers love graphs. We're nerds, but this makes perfect sense, and this is what we've been hearing for years, and we definitely want to get that ROI uptick eventually. So that's what we'll be talking about that next hour. So that's gonna be pretty cool.
Nice.
Yes.
I don't see any other questions, but feel free to jump in when you can. I wanted to talk about some considerations and challenges, and maybe a little bit about what various agencies that we're working with have done. So first and foremost, OpenRoads is a new product, and while there are some configurations from your legacy Geopack inroads products that you can migrate over, there's still, the reality is there's a lot of additional setup and configuration that needs to happen. These dynamic civil engineering programs are very configuration focused. I mean, if you're doing this in Civil 3D, it's the same deal. You've got a lot of configuration to make it work right. And those configurations are really set up with a workflow in mind. So it's a combination of setup and workflow. So not only do you need to set things up, you need to communicate to your internal staff or your consultant partners what workflows were intended to, in concert with the configuration you've delivered, so that you get the product that you require. And these two pieces of work are not insignificant. George's folks at Utah DOT have spent an enormous amount of dollars and time to go through, and I think we're on our third iteration of the OpenRoads workspace, and this third version is extremely good now.
Yeah, Terry, it may even be on the fourth iteration, because we've been, we started out in 2016 with sort of a baseline and have worked from there, and we're kind of updating on the fly here in the last 3 to 4 months.
Wow. Yeah. So there's the configuration piece, and then just what are the critical parts that you need to communicate in terms of workflow and basic training of people? If you try to approach OpenRoads modeling the way you've done inroads traditionally, you're going to have a bad time. And so there's a lot of things you need to think about there, and investment that needs to be made. Florida DOT's also done a yeoman's effort in both of these regards as well. So part of the success is putting effort into those. We are finding, particularly with this whole COVID business, with having everyone remote, that having a document management system like ProjectWise is pretty powerful and almost critical for OpenRoads projects. So I'm now in the process at Lochner of working through a project that comes right from a corporate leadership to now mandate and control all CAD workspaces at a central point. And so we're moving everything to anything that starts in ProjectWise. Any project that is a OpenRoads project is absolutely going to be in ProjectWise. And some agencies like Utah make it easy for us whiny consultants, and Bob puts the project out on the Utah server and we just connect to it and do it. But as a consultant, that's not always 100%. That's not 100%. We can't, if we're pursuing a project, we may need a copy of that workspace. So we have a local copy of the Utah workspace. for when
Yeah,
they're doing
just so Terry knows, I don't like it when he says Bob's name out loud. I don't want anyone knowing who he is and stealing him or something.
Yeah, Bob was like a one-man army. And so the other option is, do you go with the cloud versus consultant hosted? We're moving to the Bentley cloud for a number of reasons, because it allows us to do some of this iTwin stuff, if that's the direction that the projects want to go. So there's some considerations there, but if you don't have a document management system that's set up, or it's not project wise, there could be some additional configuration and things you need to think about with respect to open roads. So there's some stuff that has to be done there. But if you're a consultant and you're working on disk and you're trying to work remotely, you're going to want to get some sort of document management system, whether that's project wise or something else, because things work better rather than trying to work over the network. And then there's just the changes to standards and documentation. I know that several agencies, when they started moving to modeling, they were discovering that when they would try to produce civil cells or do models of things that they had standard details for, that as it turns out, when they modeled it, the detail didn't actually work in reality. And so they would reach out to the contractors and say, oh, yeah, we just looked at the detail and we know what you want. It's not like we haven't built that thing before, so we just build it right and get on with our day. So some of the agencies have gone back and revisited some of those standard details in light of the modeling experience and made changes to those. Then there's the documentation of workflows, training documentation. All these are all things that you need to be thinking about if you want to have a successful implementation of model-based delivery. George, did you want to add anything else there about what you guys are doing? You guys have got a really good website we should talk about.
Yeah, we have a lot of information on our website. It's digital delivery at udot.utah.gov, and I'll throw that in the chat. But I think everything that Terry said is right on point. And, especially with the project-wise workspace, at least for us, we feel like that's one of the most important things we're doing right now. And specifically, we've targeted signing, striping, and barrier. And we made a strategic decision not to create 3D graphics, but instead we're using line styles with all the 3D information associated with it. And what that allows us to do is sort of set up almost a data governance that is allowing us to push it to an Esri collector and to other parts of, whether it's iTwin, whether it's Synchro, whether it's another vendor's tools, or to our own system. Now we've got sort of a set data flow. And so whether you're storing your files or whether you're doing your workspace, all of that stuff becomes critical in the end. And I think when Terry started this, maybe the most important thing is to have that vision of, we ultimately want to get to that digital twin. We want to have that BIM for infrastructure, whatever the buzzword of the day is, but essentially a database that allows anyone in the organization to go in and get information. And setting this stuff up becomes incredibly important.
Absolutely. So I've got one more slide, and I want to talk about a little bit about path forward and just things to think about. So we've presented some things for you to think about, and what that really is telling you is that the path to better ROI comes from having a strategic vision. As an agency, you really need to have an overall end game and have a strategic vision that's in line with the steps that we've outlined to get to a better ROI. You have to have good messaging. You have to be able to communicate very clearly to the internal staff and also your consultants about what the expectation is, what those workflows are. Make sure there's training is covered. Pilot projects and partners. We've done a lot of pilot projects in Utah. Florida is doing some pilot projects. I really think that for when you're trying to do change management, it's really important to do a few pilot projects, both with internal staff and the consultants. Take all that information and roll that back into your workflows and other communication. And that's something that Utah has done an extremely good job of. There's now, the other benefit is that there's a number of consultants. I shouldn't say this, but because I'm a consultant and we all want to sell how great we are. But the fact is that in Utah, there's a number of really capable consultants that can now deliver model-based delivery. And so that's good. That means you're getting a more consistent deliverables as the pilot projects progress, and you're also training the wider user base at the same time, and you're not biting off more than you can chew. So I'm really a firm believer in doing pilot projects. The other thing you can think about is staging the rollouts. I know some states that I've talked to have talked about doing rolling stage rollouts based on regions or based on certain kinds of projects. So thinking about how you're doing this so you don't have to flip the switch all at once. You'll still have to have some sort of final end date, like you guys have November 1st of 2020. Anything left after that has to be done. But thinking about how you approach this problem in a staged way is, I think, a smart way to go. Looking at alternative contracting methods, particularly with those pilot projects. So George can speak to this. The early pilot projects were done with CMGC, and I'll let him talk a little bit about that. And then before I bring George in, the last thing is just stakeholder inclusion. This all works better if you work with the consultant community and they work with you. One of the things that was nice about Utah and sort of the culture in Utah is that although we compete aggressively against each other, that most of the folks are very open. Maybe the contractors are a little less reticent in the early phases with their partners there, or their competitors there, but the consultant community is very open to sharing information and ideas and workflows and things that were probably proprietary to how we do stuff for the betterment of the entire industry in the state. So George, what do you have to add to that in terms of like things they should think about strategically?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of go down this list. Strategic vision, a little bit that I talked about before, is at least we started with that thought of we called it existing condition database. We wanted to have the ability to have the existing condition at any point. And that kind of stemmed from one of a past employee of UDOT, Stan Burns, and he started this sort of mission to go out and we had Mandley run our roads with mobile LiDAR, and we got every single mile of our road geospatially located and set up on a GIS system so that people could go in and get information. Well, that's where we started thinking, we've got this static database that we can use. But that was the vision, that ultimately we'd have this existing condition database. So as we went down this path, we started kind of giving the messaging first that the milestone to begin with was to make the model the legal document. And we didn't quite know what we were going to choose, but we made a goal of the end of 2015 to basically advertise and award a project with the model as a legal document. So it's along this messaging part, but on the stakeholder inclusion, what we did was we had a couple of workshops where we wanted to find out, let's brainstorm the risks that are associated with it. And then let's have another workshop where we've taken those risks and try and figure out how we're going to mitigate that to make the model the legal document. And what that did was that led to what Terry mentioned, CMGC, and that's contract management by the general contractor. And essentially what we do is we bring a contractor in on the design phase where we believe that the risk is high for things in construction that we're not familiar with. So on this project we started on, there's basically no risk in construction. We would never, ever, ever do CMGC on it. But the risk was the model being the legal document. And so as a group, we thought, hey, why don't we do this CMGC? And what that will do is we're bringing the contractor in, exchanging our files, making sure that the model they've got, most of our contractors are Trimble, in Trimble Business Center matches. We were using SS4. I think we started with SS3, and that was I don't know how many people have used it. It was a little bit of a disaster for us. But we ended up starting over. The designer started over on that project like literally 15 times. Small project. He was able to redo it almost immediately by the end. But that sitting down with the designer and the contractor and kind of going back and forth and seeing where the differences were was a gigantic benefit. So CMGC helped us tremendously on that first project where, like I said, we almost could tell contractors, hey, here's what we want to do. It was a passing lane on a mountain pass without sheets or anything. It's that kind of no risk. but doing it CMGC ended up helping us tremendously. And then we used mobile devices and rovers in the summer of 2016. And we did have plan sheets as for information only. And both the contractors and the field crews relied on that to begin with. But by the end of the project, they said they used Open Roads Navigator because it ended up being easier. So bringing in industry, consultants, internal contractors is a huge deal. When we went to our first project without sheets, we essentially, before we did that, we went to the contracting community and said, hey, you've seen the direction we're going. We've done 2 or 3 pilot projects. What are your concerns? And we brought contractors in one by one, and Bentley and Trimble graciously said, yeah, we'd love to come and sit in on that, and heard all of the concerns from the contractors. Again, huge help for the contractors and for industry to understand what we needed. And then we had another sort of sat down with contractors, Federal Highways, Autodesk, Bluebeam, Bentley, probably 6 or 7 vendors, and tried to hammer out, our contractor estimators need a solution if we're going to not cut sheets, because that's what they use in Bluebeam to do their estimating. So that was another huge help for us. So we've kind of done pilot projects and partnered with not just consultants, but contractors and Federal Highways and vendors as well, and kind of let them know what's working and what's not. And it's really, really, really helped. And so in that progression, we've kind of increased the complexity of the projects in a staged rollout, where when we felt confident after that first project, we said, okay, let's try simple projects like that, bid build. And then we increased the complexity and kept it CMGC, had success there and continued to do that. And then we've gone where we don't cut sheets anymore. We're basically just putting out the design with file formats as for information only, and then the DGNs and reference files as the legal document. And we were using Open Roads Navigator. Now I don't know what we're using from a Bentley standpoint. It may be Synchro. We have it on a project that we're piloting, but we've developed a GIS solution that our inspectors like better. So that's currently what we're using, and we're now we're at 4 projects where we haven't cut sheets, and a couple of those projects are major projects. So the reason we have gotten to this point is literally because of consultant, contractor, vendor, Federal Highways, and I'm leaving out internal, but I mean, our internal group is a gigantic reason for this too. So I personally can't say enough about, the more people you can get involved in the conversation, the likelihood is that you will have success.
Perfect. George, I think you kind of covered this a little bit, but I want to read the question so everybody can see it, hear it, and see if you have any other thoughts. Paul asked another question. At what point of model development did you make it the legal document? Was it 100% or something less?
So we took a little bit different approach. And what I mean specifically by that was, initially, there was a lot of concern about the things we couldn't do. What are we going to do about right-of-way? What are we going to do about utilities? What are we going to do about those things that, typically are not surface-oriented? And so what we talked about with model development, or making it developed essentially from a model that was not complete. So what is the concern with putting out a model that may not be complete? And we kind of came to the conclusion that, the surface model is going to be substantially better than just putting out sheets that have, a 40 by 40 grid or a cross section or something like that. And so we didn't say, designer, here's what 100% complete is, or here's what's needed to be. We really gave that latitude to the designer to decide what needed to be delivered for the model to be the legal document. And it wasn't just the surface. It was all the other stuff. It was the striping. It was the sliding. It was the guardrail. all of that stuff was part of the legal document. And so then the question came, well, what about stuff like your standard drawings? And so what we ended up doing was we had the ability to attach details and cross sections and standard drawings to those elements so that it still had that legal intent with it, but it was essentially the same way we did projects anyway. And we had the same concern as that question: what should we be doing? And so we went and actually talked with the contractor and the construction crews 4 or 5 times. And at one point near the end, we said to the contractor, tell us what's different about this project than other projects for you. And we expected them to go into a big detail about how this didn't work and how that, and contractor foreman looked at us and said, you know what, this really isn't any different than any other project we've done, except that we had some efficiencies that we were able to do substantially more quickly than if we would have had to go back and produce a new plan sheet for a change order.
This question, there's a couple other questions. This question also made me think of the MDS. So we've Utah and other states have been talking about, well, how do we set up a level of detail for what the modeling level of detail should be, what we're going to require as an agency. And Utah is just wrapping up a very detailed and well thought out model development standard handbook that communicates exactly that. And there was a lot of discussion about levels of detail and what that means and how to define that so it's really clear to the engineers, the record.
And to the contractors.
Yeah. So that digital delivery link that George posted, that model development standard document is going to be out there in the
next 2 weeks. It may even be sooner than that.
Yeah, and it's a lot of Utah spent a lot of time and energy to make that happen. And even if you don't, even if you're not there yet, it's definitely worth your time to go and utilize that as a resource because it's quite good. Yeah,
since I basically did nothing, I can say that I thought it was a really good document that was produced on it. It came out really, really well.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, do go check out that link. There's a number of training videos that for specific things for modeling that literally don't exist in the level of detail anywhere else on the internet. Like display rule videos and some other things that are very specific that they recognize that there were gaps and they filled those in. But if you're thinking about long-term asset management and what you're expecting from the consultants, you're going to have to produce some sort of model development standard, have a definition of level of development, and I think what Utah's done is a good go by.
Yeah, Terry, let me throw in. We produced a guidance document for digital delivery June 2019, about a year ago, and at that time, that document was sort of this fire hose of everything for everyone. And so I believe that's still on there now, but that website's going to change fairly dramatically in about the next 2 weeks, where we've broken it up into the individual sections. So like Terry just said, the model development standards is going to be a unique document. We're going to have contractor deliverables, which will be a unique, I don't know if it's a document, it might be, we're calling it a card within the website. And then there will be, here are what Terry was talking about, tips and tricks for designing and how you would do specific things. And then there will be, here are requirements. And then there's going to be, if you're a project manager, here are the things you need to pay attention to. So there's a lot of good information, and there's also archives of things we've done in the past. So if you think it would be valuable, take a look. There is an awful lot of information on there.
And we've got about 2 minutes left, and one question real quick. If you could, George, David Gormley. Mel, hey Mel, how you doing? He asked, have you all compared construction costs from the old method on similar projects to this new digital delivery method?
So we haven't compared directly, but what we've seen is, and this is a non-scientific, non-data answer, that we're getting fewer change orders. One of the projects Terry was on was the first project we didn't do with sheets. We ended up with 2 change orders on it. One was a transit, which we didn't have anything to do with, and the other was a local government water line that would have been a change order on any project. But I think we reduced it on other ones, and not necessarily on the construction side. But what we have found is that I think it's been on everyone we've let so far. The engineer's estimate has been higher than what we've awarded the project for. So I think contractors are able to get in and do phasing and find ways to be, more competitive than they have in the past. So we're seeing that as well.
Yeah, I think on quantities for State Road 10, when I talked to Kiewit, I think my earthwork was off by like 2 cubic yards in difference between their software, our software, over a mile.
Yeah, and what was that, 40,000 or more?
Yeah,
for a total?
Yeah, I forget the exact number, but I was so surprised it was that close. I thought I'd screwed something up. So
yeah, we had the same thing on SR20. It was I think it was a 45,000, and that was the CMGC. It was off by a yard when they were done.
Okay, now you're just bragging. Really, guys? Well, I appreciate you guys taking the time to do this, and Terry for finding civilization and a cell signal and all that stuff wherever the heck you are out there in the wild, wild west. So, George, I always appreciate talking to you. I wish we had more time to talk about the Utah innovative culture, but maybe we'll get a chance to do that at another conference, because I always enjoy hearing you talk about that mentality. And that's what I'm hoping here in Kentucky we can get. And plug for the next segment, we're going to talk about Kentucky's path going towards a digital delivery. So,
well, thanks for the opportunity, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, guys. Love seeing you and hearing you.
All right, we'll see you later.
All right, you guys have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm going to go ahead and